That's right, another Glitch in the Matrix episode from Korea. As usual, I'm happy to be able to push out another glitch episode. As I mentioned before, the concept of glitch in the matrix is not exactly an established genre in Korea, and there's no dedicated thread as such. And I just have to go through stories until I find something that could fall into glitch category. And yet, here's already the 5th dedicated episode. If you missed my previous glitch stories, the playlist is in the description and at the corner of the screen. Today's stories fall largely into 2 categories. One is a potential dimensional shift or multi-universe, and the other is what could be a sort of telepathy or physical manifestation of a strong human connection. Whatever the case, they are definitely all very bizarre. So here are 7 allegedly true glitch in the matrix stories from Korea, as always, handpicked, translated and narrated by your host, Anthony. I'm 17. I have weird memory from my childhood. Not just 1 or 2 scenes, but a whole chunk of period, probably up to when I turned to 5 or 6. In this memory, my childhood home was in a countryside. The whole surrounding was lush green and dense forest, and people still dressed in traditional way. The leader of the village was my grandpa. My dad was his bastard son, and I was not allowed to call grandpa, grandpa. On the surface, he kept a stern face to me, often telling me that I should behave extra carefully, otherwise people would call me behind the back bastard's daughter. But in private, I knew he cared for me a lot. I also remember my usual playmates were 2 boys in rags, 1 much neater-looking girl, and her older brother. We roamed around, sling-shooting birds, foraging wild fruit, sleighing down the hill on tree barks in winter. Occasionally came by a vendor selling frozen fruit, and we were all so excited about it. We really didn't have any money, so took out the wild fruit we gathered or broken metal bits to exchange them with frozen fruit. There were no cars or electricity. A day ended when the sun went down. Even bull or horse-drawn wagons were rare luxury. My grandpa was one such who had the privilege to drive around on one such. He must have been pretty rich and powerful, at least in that village. People would step aside and bow to him when Grandpa drove on his wagon. Even my parents and I had to bow, as my dad was just a bastard. The saddest memory is my older brother's death. He was a few years older than I. He was a good student, already a brilliant hunter at that early age, but above all, a caring brother for me. But he didn't survive an epidemic that grabbed the village. So many were sick that the necessary medicinal herb ran short, and he died before we even could get hold of it. I remember I cried my eyes out. And then, when I turned to 5 or 6, I have this fragmented memory of people screaming, and my grandpa running around beating a drum to urgently alarm his villagers. Soon we were all running away. I remember I fell asleep on my mom's back, and when I woke up, I found myself in this world, so different from the village I used to live in thus far. Now Mom didn't go to the well to draw water bucket by bucket, but simply turned on the tap in the kitchen. My dad didn't go hunting, but went to work every morning in his suit. I was so confused and scared for some time, and nagged Mom when we were going back to our village, but Mom didn't seem to understand what I meant. I kept insisting and asking about the village and life there. And in the end, Mom took me to a child psychiatrist. It was a difficult period of time for me. And when one day I mourned how I missed my late older brother, my biggest comforter when he was alive, Mom's reaction was, "What are you talking about? You never had an older brother. You are imagining things again." Her eyes or tone of voice seemed truly not remembering anything about my dear brother. It shut me down so hard, and I stopped mentioning about the village or any memory from there to my parents anymore. Now, I'm used to the new life here, but I can't help but feeling this hole in my heart, that I might be the only one who remembers the village, its people, and the life there. I still feel so sad occasionally that I have nobody to talk about this, not even my parents. So, I turn to the anonymous cyberspace to talk about it now. A few days ago, I was invited to the wedding of my mate from high school. We are not exactly close friends. Well, to be honest, we hadn't met since graduation, but it was an occasion to celebrate and also meet other high school mates, so I gladly attended the event. Indeed, there were lots of familiar faces, and we were spending a jolly good time into the late night at the reception. When the newlyweds joined our table, we of course couldn't miss throwing the usual questions like how they first met. Apparently they met as a recruiter and a recruitee when my friend was struggling to find a job and survive in the jungle that was Seoul. That was already 7 years ago, and those years leading to the marriage was not all smooth sailing. They both had quite strong characters, and the clash led to several breakups and reconciliations. Well, so far nothing too unusual for a long-term couple. Then, when they broke up for the last time, it was indeed very serious. Normally, one of them would have made a first move to patch up, but this time there was no contacts at all for a couple of months. My friend thought it was all over and spent days on alcohol. But life carried on, and one day he had to work into late night and was on the way home. In the metro train well past the rush hour were lots of empty seats, but he somehow felt like standing and was looking out the night view outside with the earbuds in for his usual playlist of music. Suddenly he heard some noise. It sounded like somebody sobbing. It clearly wasn't a part of music that he'd been listening to hundreds of times. To be able to hear through the noise-cancelling earbuds, it must have been quite a loud sobbing, but he could not see anybody crying in the train. Passengers sparsely occupying seats were either dozing away or fiddling with their phones. He shrugged and turned his eyes to the window again, but he heard the same sobbing again. He looked around one more time, but everything was calm and usual in the train. Somewhat alarmed, he turned down the volume of the music and listened out for the source of the noise. Silence. Was it a hallucination or what? He was about to give up and turn up the music again. It was clearer than before. He was all goosebumps now and looked up startled. And in the reflection on the window was the back of a woman with a long hair, crying in a white mourning dress. He screamed despite of himself. It was so much more shocking because he was caught off guard. Everybody in the train looked at him funny for his scream. Now more embarrassed than scared, he got off as soon as the door opened at the next station. He realized it was the very station he used to see his girlfriend off countless times. Next moment he was dialing her despite of himself.
Hello.
Her voice answering the phone was half drowned in tears, and only then he realized why the mystery sobbing earlier in the train bothered him so much, because it sounded so familiar, because it was the voice of his girlfriend. "What's wrong?" was his instinctive reaction.
My dad. He's dead.
He ran straight to the funeral home and was once again shocked to see his girlfriend in her white mourning dress. She happened to have her long hair down when he walked into the funeral home, and it looked exactly like the reflection of the woman he saw in the train. The girlfriend's father had suffered a chronic health issue, which suddenly got much worse about a month after their breakup, and he passed away in the afternoon of the very that day. I guess they were really meant to stay together. Some human connections are sometimes spookily strong, I find. Do you know the stop-motion animation called Wallace and Gromit? Its first short episode was produced in 1989, but was released in Korean cinemas only in 1997. I was 13 in 1997, and in the first year in the middle school. When I first saw Wallace and Gromit, I was baffled, because I already knew the film. I asked others if it had shown on TV, perhaps, but they only confirmed it was the first official release in Korea, and it was before widespread internet yet. My parents divorced when I was 7, and I grew up at my grandparents' in a countryside village tucked far away from everything. Even when I came to live with Dad again at 12, his new wife was so mean that I couldn't even dare to turn on a radio, let alone a TV. What I want to say is, I had no real opportunities to have known Wallace and Gromit before 1997 when I got to watch it at school cinema club I was then a member to. It was the first time I started to have interest in the idea of parallel universe because I could not explain it otherwise. The thing is, this wasn't the only time. So much so I feel anxious whenever I happen to go to a cinema, wondering if it wouldn't be another case of a film I had seen before somewhere and somehow. And when it turns out so, I would tell my friends and companies that I had seen it somewhere and explain its plot and scenes in details. They would say, "Oh, how curious." But I could sense they don't really trust what I should say, that I probably have looked up about the film somewhere beforehand. It's not even just about films, by the way. One day I joined a dinner with my sister-in-law and her friends. I'd never met any of her friends, and yet I took an instant dislike of one of them. There was nothing wrong with her at all. She was polite to me and bright and bubbly with other friends, and yet I almost felt a sort of aversion to her that I left the table early. Later I asked sister-in-law about the girl, if she didn't have such and such work, and if she wasn't living with her boyfriend. My sister-in-law was surprised and wondered how I knew all that about her friend when that was the first time I met her. Or, for another case, once I just bursted into tears when I first saw my maths teacher in high school because I just knew his most sad history, which I wouldn't go into details here. My wife would say it's nothing much more than a common déjà vu, but no, my memory about random films and people are much more detailed and precise comparing to mere feeling of déjà vu. I even once asked a shaman, but she said it had nothing to do with a spiritual gift either. Could it be really because of another me living in a parallel universe? Exactly 3 months and 2 weeks ago, I was all flushed with anger because I lost my then just a week-old brand new mobile. I called my number time after time, but only got the message that my phone was off. Whoever picked it up must have turned it off. I cursed the person, whoever it might be, but at the same time prayed he or she be my savior and return my precious and expensive phone. I even got a warning from my professor because I was busy fiddling with my friend's phone to keep dialing my number the whole time during his lecture. And then, at lunchtime, finally the signal went, meaning my phone was turned back on. Pick it, pick it, pick it, pick it, I chanted.
Hello.
The voice that answered was that of a woman, but almost creepily devoid of emotion, monotoned with no ups and downs. But what do I care if I could get my phone back? Hello, excuse me, I'm the owner of the phone. I must have dropped it somewhere. It'll be most kind of you if you'd let me know where you are. I'll come to pick up the phone. At your convenient time, of course, I said.
I see.
This must be one shy girl, I thought. So, could you please tell me when and where I could find you? What the? The phone disconnected? I suppressed my growing anxiety and dialed again, but the phone was off again. And it remained the same into the next day. So, I had lost my brand new phone. 3 months and 2 weeks later, today is my last day in this room. The term ends tomorrow and I'm to move back to my parents. Complaining about the stuffs I had unwittingly accumulated, I started cleaning and packing things up. And when I moved out the bed from the wall to clean, I could not believe my eyes. My phone that went missing 3 months and 2 weeks ago was there. I don't believe in ghosts or paranormals in general, but I'm certain there's some sort of sixth sense between people, a connection beyond rational explanation. A couple of years ago, I had some issue that tortured my heart. I had nobody to confide it to and almost felt suffocated with the weight of the emotional burden. I cried by myself and, in spite of myself, called out, "Mom," in my mind. Not long after, I got a call from Mom. She said she was preparing lunch at home when she, out of nowhere, heard my voice calling for her. Was everything all right with me? She asked. My family home was a good 2-hour journey away from where I lived at the time. March 18th, 2009. Time was passing 2:30 in the morning. My phone buzzed. Rather late call, but I'm anyway a night owl, so I picked it up. Hello?
Hey mate, it's Jinsu. Come out and have a drink with me. I'll be waiting at the pavilion at Square 75.
It was my friend Chinsu. Now? I don't feel like a drink now, I said.
Come on, it's my treat.
It's late too. I'd rather go to bed.
I'll be waiting at the pavilion in Square 75.
And he hung up. My dad, who was watching TV, asked me, "Why, who was it?" "It's my friend. He asks me to come out to have a drink." "Gosh, I'm actually tired," I said.
A friend for a bad day is a true friend. Maybe he's got something he has to say,
said my dad, a typical old-fashioned Busan man. So I set off to walk about 15 minutes to Square 75. For those who are not familiar with Busan City, Square 75 is actually not a square, but a scenic rock formation along the coastal road. I grumbled about this uncalled-for night outing, but at one corner of my mind, I felt something was a bit off. Calling me out so late and to an unlikely spot was odd in itself, but Jin's voice over the line didn't feel like his usual self either, bit too serious and husky. Meanwhile, I could see the pavilion on the rock from afar, and somebody lying on the ground before that? Maybe a drunkard fallen asleep. I approached to give him a hand, and only then realized it was Jinsu, my mate. The ground underneath him was soaked with blood. "Hey, wake up! What happened?" I called out, but he was fast unconscious. I called the emergency and kept calling his name, but his face was getting visibly blue. I was so frightened and called my dad too. It seemed my call woke him up from his sleep, but he calmly instructed me what I should do: to cover him warm, gently tilt his head to the side if he should throw up. And he drove up before the ambulance arrived. I was so frightened and out of mind and wouldn't have known what to do were it not for Dad. While Jinsu was sent in for an emergency operation, Dad filled in all the necessary forms and reminded me to call Jinsu's family too. While waiting for his family to arrive, we sat in front of the operation theater.
"So, do you know what happened?"
Dad asked. "I don't know. I just found him on the ground in that state," I said. Dad seemed to be thinking something. After a long silence, he opened his mouth.
"There are inexplicable things in life. It probably was his guardian angel."
"What do you mean?" I said.
"Didn't you hear in the ambulance? The paramedic mentioned Jinsu seemed to be in that state, possibly for over an hour." "And when did you get his call?" Dad said. It hit me suddenly. I quickly checked my phone history. There was no record of the call from Jinsu. Later I asked Jinsu's sister to check his phone too, and there was no call history on Jinsu's phone either. After a few days of unconsciousness, Jinsu finally woke up. He still needs rehabilitation treatment twice a week, but at least on the way to recovery. Apparently he was hit by a car that night, and the driver just ran away. He says his memory cuts short shortly after the accident, and doesn't remember ever calling me. Maybe it was his guardian angel, as my dad said. Maybe it was my friend's sheer will to live. I don't know. One late summer night in 2016, I got a call from my brother. Apparently he was out drinking at a bar and didn't bring his ID with him to prove he was of legal age. "Can you bring it to me?" he asked. The bar was about an hour away on foot. My mom suggested to walk there together for exercise, and I agreed. We dropped the ID card at the bar, and since we were out to exercise anyway, we decided to walk all the way back home too. About 10 minutes in the journey back, I noticed something was off. I was familiar with the route, and by fact knew it was a rather busy area around the clock. But that day, there was nothing. No cars or people passing by, no shops were opened, and could not see a light on in any of the buildings or apartments around, as if there was a power outage in the whole area. Both Mom and I found it a bit creepy and speeded up our walk. Then we saw an old woman coming from the opposite direction. Phew, we were not alone after all, I first thought. But an old lady dressed in all-white hanbok with all-white hair done in an old-fashioned updo. Even the bundle she was holding was white. Mom started shivering all over when the old woman walked past us. "What's up, Mom?" I said. "Hush! Didn't you see? She didn't have feet," Mom said. Could it be? Surely Mom mistook it, I thought, and just carried on our way, until we heard a creaking noise. It sounded like somebody riding a swing. A woman was indeed riding a swing at the playground in an apartment block. Her head was looking down the ground, and the long hair was covering her face completely. Just her pale ankle and scarlet-red shoes were distinctive. Now, I started panicking too. I grabbed Mom's hand and hurried our way, and suddenly we found ourselves in a marketplace. All the shops were opened and a few people were passing by. Finally, some light and people. But the relief was short-lived. There was a lantern on the outside of each shop, and they strangely reminded me of the undertaker's lantern. The goods they were selling were things like grilled meat, fish, and fruit, and they also strangely reminded me of food offering for memorial ritual for dead. Besides, their prices were too low, just $1 or $2. As we walked through the market, people stared at us, not just the shopkeepers, but all the other shoppers too. Both Mom and I sensed something was terribly wrong, but we feared something worse might happen should we react to all the strangeness there. Fortunately, we could get out of the marketplace. After we walked a good few 100 meters away, I took a quick look back and was surprised to find the market was now full of people, and they were all looking at us. "Mom, look! The market's suddenly full of people," I said. Mom looked around too, and just hurried me up with a pale face. I phoned Dad at home to ask him to come and pick us up, but the connection was lost before I could explain the situation. And right that moment, we heard a sound of car horn and cars running. The sound got louder as if somebody was turning up the volume, and with that, everything came back to normal. Cars running down, people up and down the street, and brightly lit apartment buildings. Mom dropped on the ground with relief. I myself could not walk anymore either, so we took a bus back home. "Don't use that route again," Mom said. "It was so strange, wasn't it?" I said. "I don't think I ever saw a marketplace in that area. Or am I wrong?" she said. We quickly opened a map app, and indeed there wasn't any such old-fashioned market in the whole area. When we finally got home, I asked Dad if he didn't get my call just earlier.
"I did get a call from you, but I could not hear anything you said. Just loud ambience noise, like in a busy market, were you?"
he said. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed today's stories. As always, I'm happy to be able to make another glitch episode, as it's one of my favorite themes. My channel finally reached 500 subs recently. It took me 1.5 years to reach there, and I thank everybody who joined and supported this channel so far. I just hope it doesn't take another 1.5 years to finally push over 1,000 subs. To mark this little tiny milestone, I opened Buy Me a Coffee account. If you love this channel and would like to give me a little pat on my shoulder with a small donation there, I would really appreciate it. The link's in the description. And of course, your thumbs up, comments, and sharing my videos with your friends are always a great way to support my channel too. Once again, thank you very much. I'll come back next Sunday. Until then, stay safe and take care.